Joining and welcome to Smart Hiring, Building a Team for Brand Success. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our members joining from Naturally New York and Naturally NorCal. We're both part of the National Naturally Network and have come together today to host this program. The National Network is made up of 11 chapters around the country with over 6,000 members and a reach of nearly 50,000 people. Those people represent 25,000 companies. We are all community organizations with a mission to foster sustainable and responsible business practices, stimulate conscious business growth, support entrepreneurship, and develop exceptional leadership within the natural products community. Our chapters invite you to join us for upcoming events. In Naturally NorCal, we have 2 in-person events coming up on November 13th, Building a Thriving Business. That'll be in San Francisco. And on December 9th, we're hosting a holiday bazaar at Sports Basement, also in San Francisco. We also invite you to join one of our forums. Naturally New York has a bunch of things coming up on October 30th, that's tomorrow. AI for Food Safety, QA, and Compliance, presented by Bruce AI. On November 13th, Wellness is the New Beauty, presented by NIQ. November 20th, Women in CPG Networking event. And on December 10th, the Holiday Bazaar at Home Studios. And we hope you'll join the Naturally Network for our virtual Women in CPG Summit this November and December. Tune in for 6 sessions over 3 days and hear from female leaders from across the network. And if you'd like to exhibit at the Winter Fancy Fair in San Diego, applications are still open to join the Naturally Network Pavilion. Finally, just a tiny bit of housekeeping before we get started. We welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat, say hi, tell us who you are, and please input your questions in the Q&A box. You'll find both those options at the bottom of your Zoom menu bar. And now I'll hand it off to Alex Crane-Landesberg, Senior Brand Director of Product Development and Operations of Grove Collaborative. Alex.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex. As Monique said, I work at Grove Collaborative, where I've led product development, innovation, and operations for the past decade. I'm excited to lead today's conversation on one of the most important and challenging aspects of growing a brand, which is building the right team. And people are your greatest growth asset, but it's rare that you get to hire everybody that you want early on, especially at an early stage company. So today we're going to cover who to hire when, whether to go full-time, fractional, and we have a fantastic panel who each bring a different lens to the conversation. So I'll just go through the panelists, and then if you could each just do a quick intro, that would be great. We've got Cynthia Billups, Ryan Hall, who's a partner at Giannuzzi Lewendon, which I'm mispronouncing, Michelle Hurons from hiring, and Meredith Slacken from ForceBrands. So if each of you just want to do a quick intro, and then we can get into the discussion.
Hello all, I'll start. I'm Cynthia Billups. I have more than 2 decades of experience helping teams and culture grow stronger, clearer, and more aligned around their strategic goals. I currently am a consultant, and my work spans various industries. I've gone from tech to CPG to community-based nonprofits. Everything that I do involves assessing current state, sort of matching dreams with capacity and mitigating risk. I sit at the intersection of product development, innovation, and operations. I'm an expert at helping organizations, founders, and entrepreneurs support their great ideas with, some nuts and bolts. So one of the things that I know is that I'm really great at helping organizations to really identify their near and long-term goals and make roadmaps to figure out how you're going to get there incrementally. A little bit about my background. I served as the director of direct services at ICA, where we helped early stage entrepreneurs, especially from underrepresented communities, build businesses that are capital ready, sustainable, and able to grow without killing the founder or bankrupting the company. Before that, I was at One Step Closer, Jedi Collaborative, where I worked with national brands to integrate equity and inclusion into how they grow and lead. I've worked with large CPG companies like Dr. Bronner's, Harmless Harvest, Once Upon a Farm, to make sure that they build internal hiring processes, and also to make sure they find and vet candidates from all over, not just from a sort of a pool of folks that know people or who are just industry insiders. And actually before that, I also oversaw the membership and programming at DevColor, which was an organization supporting Black technologists working for cornerstone tech companies like Google, Adobe, Netflix, Pinterest. We really worked to ensure that those organizations had opportunities in place to make sure that their minority members felt supported, empowered, and were given the same opportunities for advancement as everyone else. I'm going to wrap up by saying I'm super excited to be on this panel because, as we know, hiring when, who, and how is a top concern for everybody that I've worked with, regardless of size. And you know what you want to create, and the through line is people acquisition, fit, and management. So having the right people on your team at the right time is your greatest growth asset. I'm honored to be sharing the virtual stage with this thought, with these amazing thought leaders. And that's it. I will stop there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Hall. I'm a partner at Giannuzzi, Lewendon. So we are a law firm that focuses exclusively on representing CPG companies, everywhere from formation to exits. I've been with the firm for over a decade, so essentially this has been my entire career at this point. And naturally, that representation always includes a lot of hiring and growing the team as brands scale. And so we regularly advise on all types of personnel questions that companies may face as part of that process. And so happy to be a part of this panel and hopefully touch on some of those points today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I'm with Hiring. We are a proud B Corp and a 1% for the Planet company working in operations, outsourced operations, specifically back office operations, and specifically with the CPG and better for you brands area. So we do here, we've been around for about 9 years. We hire in about 24 states across the US. And we, everything from customer support to marketing operations to inventory management and operations, working with co-mans and 3PLs. And then we also have a financial and bookkeeping ops team. And I love what we see happening with our brands because it's building fractional teams to work together, especially to fill spots while brands are scaling. And so let's see, we've been a member of Naturally Network for a little while, and I'm super excited to be here with all of these awesome people too. So thank you.
Okay, I'll round us out. Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Slacken. I am the VP of Advisory Services at ForceBrands. So we work with founders, investors, and executive teams across the consumer space to really help them navigate leadership, culture, and org strategy through periods of growth and transition. Our role often begins where growth gets complex, helping companies kind of design the right leadership structure, align around strategy, and build teams that can scale. So I'm really excited today to be here and talk about one of the most important topics for early stage brands, how to build the right team at the right time. And let's talk a little bit about AI and the new ways of working and how it's reshaping what good looks like. Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. Okay, well, let's get into it. So for the first question, I'm curious, when you think about the first hires at an early stage brand, what roles or skill sets are most critical? And yeah,
I was going to hop in, sorry. Yeah. Finding the mute button. So at ForceBrands, we see some pretty significant patterns across hundreds of early stage consumer brands. The data that we have, our proprietary data, often sees that the first 5 hires determine the company's trajectory. So in the past year alone, 70% of early stage CPG companies hired in 3 key areas. So revenue generation, sales, growth, marketing, operations, and supply chain. Finance comes in a little bit later, but those are the key areas. The sequence does definitely depend on category. For instance, beverage and food brands tend to prioritize operations and route to market talent first, while beauty and wellness, they're really digging into brand, digital, and more of the growth roles. Across the board, though, what separates successful early teams is hiring integrators. So the people that can operate across functions, translate the founder's vision into execution, and wear multiple hats.
Yeah, I was going to say definitely Swiss Army type people are very helpful in this stage. And also being able to fractionally add where you see shortfalls. I would also agree with Meredith about waiting on strategic finance positions until a little bit later.
I want to actually echo and uplift something that Meredith said as well as what Michelle said. So in terms of using data to sort of figure out where you are, what we've seen with our smaller entrepreneurs is most people are sort of going with, they're in the business. And so they're sort of going with feel, what feels like people want, what direct feedback they're getting from their whoever is talking to them. And the thing to really hold there is that you may not have access to like the big databases, but most places you can get access to some data. And really using the category you're in to help balance what you think is happening because you're in the business. It's very, very, very hard to step out of the business in order to really get a more balanced view because you're running and you're running and you're running. And the people who talk to you either hate you or they love you. So there's this whole middle ground of folks who may need something else. And we are always, always, always sort of cautioning people about going straight toward marketing, spending ad dollars, figuring out how to like get more eyes when really someone like a Michelle and her company to help support your operations so that you can do what you're good at, which is being more strategic. That's almost always going to be a better hire for most of our early stage companies that we're working with.
Definitely. And I think Meredith was interesting, some of the stats that you shared, just because there's certainly been a shift towards like focusing, a lot on profitability, less available capital, and hiring for that, and not going straight into maybe spending on marketing, but really building that operational rigor up front and being set up for success. Great. So I think we've already touched on this a little bit, but there are far more people now that are either going fractional or considering fractional or freelance roles, and companies are supporting their teams with people outside the business. So how do you advise founders or hiring managers to decide whether a role should be fractional, freelance, or full-time?
I can hop in. So we often see early brands benefiting from hiring full-time where continuity and culture really matter. So typically sales leadership, operations, finance, and leaning on fractional experts for highly specialized or periods of time that come up in the business. So brand strategy, data analytics, or even HR. One stat that we have is that from the past calendar year, 1 in 3 of our placements at ForceBrands included a fractional or interim component. So that even though I just said, roles like finance should be full-time, we often see that that's more on the tactical area of finance, but roles like CFOs and CMOs are the most common fractional hires that we're seeing being made.
Yeah, and I just wanted to weigh into that. There's a, there's a little bit of legal limitation sometimes on choosing which one you're going to go with. You cannot just hire someone and say without any other consideration that, hey, this person's going to be a contractor or this person's going to be an employee. These are points that are subject to regulation. There's federal regulation, there's state regulation at play. And ultimately, the difference really comes down to a lot of how much control you have over the person, how much time they spend. In California, actually, there's a presumption that anyone that you hire is an employee, and you actually have to prove that they're not based upon satisfying a bunch of tests. And so it is something that, there's not necessarily a bright line test. But you can't just come in and say, hey, we're going to bring on this person and they're going to work 30 hours a week, but they're going to operate as our CFO. And we're going to control everything that they do. And they have to show up from 9 to 5 at our office. A lot of times, that would generally be considered probably to be an employee, even though you're trying to say that they are a fractional person. And so it's very important to make sure that you get these things right. There are some serious consequences that can happen. So first of all, there's tax obligations when you have an employee. you have withholding obligations. There's also, if someone is an employee, you have minimum wage requirements, you have benefits requirements, you have overtime. And then generally there's also just liability, right? So anything that your employee does, you're going to be responsible for. So if you fail to do these things and fail to make the correct classification, there's going to be concerns, there's going to be consequences. And I assume that most people are building businesses to eventually try to, one, either raise money, or two, eventually exit. And so this is something that investors and acquirers are going to be very focused on as well, and making sure that you've done everything appropriately. And so if there's kind of a question mark of which direction you're going, definitely go talk to an attorney and make sure you're making the right decision to avoid some of these pitfalls and consequences that can occur if you make the wrong decision.
Yeah, I would jump in there too and say that's where like a partnership with us could be helpful, because we are hiring our people as employees, and we're following the laws in each of the states that we are in. Obviously we're certified living wage as well, so we're really trying to be a B Corp type of employer where we care about developing our people, and also the fit with our brands. And so, where that also is helpful too is we can put together small teams of people. So maybe 2 fractional operations people who can then offer redundancy to our brand as well. There's never a downtime, well, rarely a downtime with 2 people out sick or 2 people out on vacation, those types of things.
So this is another place where I am just going to glom on to everything that Michelle just said. I think that one of the things that we find when we're working with our smaller brands, we really emphasize good jobs, and good jobs in the Bay Area oftentimes means that there's a higher price point to hiring someone. We expect that if you are going to seek capital and one of your tenants is that you offer good jobs, that you're at least meeting or exceeding minimum wage, that you're following all the rules that are set up for employees, and that that you have actually categorized people. There are so many people who are working on a new business, and they've just hired a bunch of part-time people because they again are sort of in that like need to get things operationalized. But HR, going back to what Michelle said, if you have the right partner in terms of providing different types of expertise regardless of the person, it actually makes it a lot easier for you to really focus in on providing the good job part for the hires that you actually do need in-house.
And I guess just a follow-up question too for the group. I think, we touched on a little bit the power of having people that are integrators that wear many hats as some of your first full-time hires versus the fractional people who can be experts. This is like going slightly off script, but I think, do you have any tips on how do you identify that, or when you're doing the hiring process? Because it sounds like those kind of people can be powerful in early stage companies. Like identify somebody who's going to be able to wear many hats, be an integrator. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it means looking at their experience and understanding that just being in the industry means that you come with other skill sets, because this has been a scrappy industry, right? So people that have been in operations often have been asked to lean in on marketing operations and being at trade shows and so really looking at their experience and spending time in interviews. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit here, but spending time in interviews, really exploring what they loved about their past roles, and then keeping that in mind. It may not be the right hire for right now, but it might be the right hire for your next hire.
Definitely. And it does lead in naturally to the next question, which is around building your hiring process. And what does it look like to have a best-in-class hiring process to get the best talent in? And especially for brands that may have a very small one-person HR team or no HR at all. Maybe, you've got a founder or somebody else who does that on the side. So I'm curious to get the perspective of this group on how you build a hiring process.
So even without HR, you can have a very disciplined, high quality hiring process. At ForceBrands, we often act as an embedded recruiting partner or RPO for emerging brands. And we implement a lot of processes that set them up for the future, for that growth stage where maybe they do bring it back in-house. But the most effective hiring processes follow three main rules. So clarity before search, defining success outcomes for the first 12 to 18 months, not just the job title, not just the words on a page, but actually understanding and gaining alignment there. Consistency in evaluation. So using structured interview and scorecards to reduce bias across all functions in all areas, all steps in the interview, and showing up and making sure we do it every single time. And then alignment in decision making. So ensuring all the stakeholders are calibrated on what good looks like before the candidates walk in, right? Let's make sure we're setting the stage and setting everyone up for success. So even with limited resources, structure and consistency really signals professionalism, and it dramatically improves as close rates for top talent.
Yeah, so as part of the hiring process, there's going to be a couple of legal documents involved typically. You don't need to have something that's overly complicated. Typically, if you're seeing like a longer employment agreement, that's usually going to be more for the protection of the employee and the company. And so just a simple offer letter is okay, but there are a couple of things that you do need to focus on. I think one of them, just say the obvious, is you should have clear alignment on whatever the base terms are, right? So stating the salary, the bonus potential, benefits eligibility, PTO structure, just the basic terms of employment, so that there's no ambiguity in terms of what the employment terms are going to be. Generally, in the U.S., there's pretty much at-will employment everywhere, including California. So you can always let someone go for a legal reason. There are definitely not legal reasons to let someone go, but it's still helpful to state that the employment is at will explicitly. And then I think probably the most important thing, again, even more so in California, in California, you can't have a non-compete or a non-solicit. And so really the most important thing to include everywhere really is that there should be clear confidentiality and assignment of IP provisions. So that confidentiality obviously means everything you learn about the business, keep it confidential. Assignment of IP is very clearly saying that everything that you're doing as an employee or as a contractor or fractional, even more so important if you're hiring someone a fractional who's not an employee, that anything that they produce is owned by the business, right? You're paying them for that. And because, especially in the CPG world, where a lot of times as startups, you're usually outsourcing supply and manufacturing, you're outsourcing distribution, you're outsourcing 3PL. What the actual business is your IP. And so it's very, very important to make sure that there aren't any holes as that hiring process. And so I think, to set up your hiring process is really to get some of these just form documents in place, and then you can just reuse them for all of your hires going forward. Shouldn't be nothing too complicated here, but it is important that this is not missed. And again, going back to the investors and acquirers point, this is something that people who come in at a later date will focus on. And so if you haven't done it, and a lot of times it's difficult to go back and get people who have already left to go and sign these documents when the relationship is over. So I think it's important to get it set up from day one.
Michelle, I think, I don't know if you want to speak at all to, what happens sometimes when a hire doesn't work out, even if maybe you've had a great process in place, and yeah, what your advice is there. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, from time to time that does happen, and it can happen, with an assignment that we've made to our, client. And we are on it every day. We're in Slack with our clients or Google Chat. with our clients and our people. So we see it pretty quickly, and we mitigate as quickly as possible if there's a personality mismatch or if there is a skill set mismatch. Then we're planning for that immediately. But it's different hiring somebody who's doing outsourcing, right, than making that hire directly on your team. If you're doing it directly on your team, you have to worry about all these things that Ryan is talking about, right? Being very clear about, upfront about what it is that you expect from them, and then being very clear. We like to say, I know Katie's on this call, she's our COO, and she always says clear is kind, right? So being clear with feedback in the moment so that you can straighten that out if it's at all possible. And then also, we also say, make the change quickly. If you really think it's not going to work out, then do it quickly, and be very upfront about the reasons why you're doing it. Because, as long as you're, trying to do things in an ethical way and you're not trying to be sneaky about it, then it tends to go really well. But like we say over here, clear is kind, and giving that feedback upfront to employees so that they have a chance to realign is super helpful.
Definitely. And I think what resonates here, being in a company that has gone from pretty scrappy and small to much larger, is, you're never too early stage or small to be clear about what success looks like from the outset, to set up agreements in a way that suits you legally, to communicate clearly and align with your full team on the role. So I think it's just a good reminder that even if you're moving fast and you're small and scrappy, it makes sense to do things the right way from the get-go. The next one is on culture with hybrid teams. Now we have so many teams that are blended, fully remote, fractional workers, full-time. What works for creating culture and accountability? Because it's more complex than ever.
So I can definitely lean in here. I want to actually, though, circle back around to something that you said, Alex, a little bit earlier. Actually, we all kind of talked about it, but this idea of finding someone who can kind of do everything. Finding someone who can do everything is fantastic. And it's also really, really important to not make them do everything. And so in addition to all of the structures we just talked about, making sure that they have super, super clear job descriptions, expectations. Also, you can identify someone who is very good at doing something that is outside their job description, make time for them to learn how to do something else, and then just be really thoughtful about understanding that you are asking them to do something that is outside of their job. And so if you're positioning that as professional development, as a proportion, opportunity for eventual, promotion, although I wouldn't say that, but there's all these opportunities to build skills, build talents. Just make sure that you know that that's what you're asking. Anytime you inquire if someone can just work real quick at the trade booth, understand that you are taking away from the job that you set out for them to do, and make sure that's reflected if there's some sort of review process, both that it's noted that they did that, and also that they may have made it so that they couldn't actually take advantage of maybe whatever their normal goal was, all the opportunities to reach a regular goal. So being super, super balanced. Back to what Michelle said about clear is kind. Make sure that people understand that you are seeing the work that they're doing, regardless of if they're doing it proactively, if you're asking them to do it. I find that all my conversations around company culture, anyone who is really, really approaching the conversation with me from a kind of disgruntled place, it's always about not being recognized. Always. And yes, there are different ways to recognize people. Some people don't feel recognized, even though you think you're doing a really good job. But one of the best, freest way to make sure that you retain top talent is to see what they're doing, acknowledge what they're doing, and recognize it, at least verbally. It doesn't have to be fiscal. Honestly, most people just want to be assured that they're appreciated. Completely free. So that's one thing. In terms of culture across hybrid companies, the biggest thing that I would have to put out there is make sure your tech works. If you have an in-person meeting with some of your staff that's offsite, make sure that they can join that meeting. Make sure that if they're not spending the first 15 minutes trying to figure out how to get Zoom to work, make sure that the sound works. If you can't consistently do that, actually figure out a different way to have meetings, because being part of that conversation ensures everybody, especially people who are remote, that their actual input actually matters. During those meetings, make sure that you're asking for people to actually say something or contribute something. They can put it in chat. They can even afterwards send out a little survey, anything that we forgot. Really, really trying to ensure that there are multiple methods that you have to let team members feel heard. Again, that is the bottom line. Even if you don't or can't act on something, people feeling heard is 70% of really ensuring that folks will stick around. Another thing that we really, really try and do when we're working, especially with companies that have a production floor, is to make sure that you understand the difference between equity and equality. So if you're saying, okay, we're going to have this event, we're going to have this team get together, we're going to bring in cupcakes, understand that your admin team is going to be treated differently than your production team typically. And that's on purpose because they have different jobs, but really, really make sure that you are not sort of saying, well, we're going to have cupcakes for the admin team, so we're also going to have cupcakes for the production workers. They mean different things to different people, and they're accessible in different ways. And so when you're figuring out what your benefits look like, when you're figuring out what your inclusion opportunities look like, you want an outcome that is based on a feeling or a goal. You want to make sure that people feel supported, seen, included. That's not the same as we are going to do X for this team and X for this team because they're the same. It's fine to get enough information to figure out how to make people feel included where they are, and that is not a disruption for their current work. And the last the last two things I'll say, they're kind of like mirror opposites. One is, whenever you can, try and pair people across departments, because there's this idea of reciprocal mentorship. Everyone has a talent, everyone has a skill, everyone has a viewpoint, and having these cross conversations that you allow time for, that you're giving people paid time to do, and you're actually requiring it as part of, again, some kind of performance review. Having these cross conversations is extremely, extremely, it's a very good way to make it so that people can engage in conversations that are non-defensive, and can learn how to communicate across sectors, can see what other people do, can step up and peer-to-peer support each other, and also step up and just sort of know more about what's happening in a part of the company or in a branch that you didn't really know about. So super easy, super low cost to just put in a system where folks have a reciprocal relationship that's sort of a peer-to-peer, one-to-one mentor. And I've seen it in tiny organizations, I've seen it in huge organizations. It's really a system. It does not take that much work. And the flip side of that is really, really, really underscoring underscoring confidentiality, that these relationships are not to be shared, and they're not to be manipulated. And so that's a training. So there's several different kinds of trainings that you can have for everybody, but one of the really key trainings is to know when you need to be in a confidential space, and when you, not even when, but how you can share information that maybe comes to you through some kind of confidential means. If it needs to be shared, there are ways to share that information in a way that preserves the trust, preserves the safety. And that's another really core part of building that internal community that doesn't cost anything. People just need to know that they need to look out for each other, that they are expected, they can expect people to look out for them. But at the same time, if there is an actual problem, there's a way to bring that up without having anyone kind of get in trouble.
Michelle, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about, no, okay, about cultivating culture remotely, okay. We had touched on this briefly, but I think Ryan, if you want to elaborate on any of the kind of like legal hiring pitfalls that you see early brands miss, you talk about the misclassification of employees, but like what are other things that people should be aware of that may not be on their radar?
Yeah, so I think a near constant in the startup world is there's probably less free cash than the business would like to have, and so what's the way to kind of bridge the gap in that and some of that value? It's typically equity, right? Or it's very commonly equity, and so I think Michelle was talking earlier about employees that don't work out how to navigate that, and so that's something that's very important to keep in mind for equity issuances as well, right? So even though the equity is being used as a time to kind of conserve cash and bridge that gap in value, it might end up being the most expensive consideration that you give anyone in the entire company, so starting off at the very beginning. And so it's important to have the terms filled correctly there. I think one of the biggest points to always think about is just vesting, making sure that we're talking about employees that don't work out early, right? You want to make sure that, look, if someone comes along and works for you for 6 months, they're not walking away with equity. Hopefully, they were not really a material contributor in the overall story of the business, and so you want to preserve that. And so I think making sure that you have some vesting terms with like a cliff where you don't get anything until a certain amount of time, first year or something like that. A lot of times we'll see performance-based vesting as well. You want to you hire a salesperson, someone in charge of marketing. Nothing should vest maybe unless they've actually done their sales job and they've increased revenue in the channel that you're looking for, or overall performance. And so these are kind of things to just make sure that the equity being given to someone at a time that's very critical and potentially very expensive down the road is going to be aligned with the goals that you're trying to achieve by giving someone that equity. Some other provisions that we see to help just protect people and make sure is that, a lot of times we'll try to put in some repurchase or forfeiture provisions too. If someone leaves the company, let's say that they leave the company because they get caught stealing from the company, you don't want that person to have equity. And so it's important to make sure that you've got that they're going to forfeit whatever they had. Or maybe even if someone leaves and on good terms, you have someone senior, but now you need to replace them, right? That the equity that you gave this person previously, now you have to give that same equity potentially to whoever their replacement is going to be. And so you can either double up on how much you've given, or you can have a repurchase right, so where you can kind of buy out the first person, and then you have freed up the equity to give to whoever the replacement is going to be. And so if you don't do these things, if you don't set up these terms for your initial equity issuances, it can just be a very, very expensive mistake, right? If we're talking about, if you sell a company for $50 million and we have a 1% equity problem, you just made a $500,000 mistake. And so it's very important to make sure that these details are correct on kind of managing how employees are going to receive the equity in these early stages, and what control we can have to potentially take that back.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too a little bit. One of the things that we do at Hiring is everybody is an owner. We have an employee stock incentive plan. And we've had to do that, Ryan, where we've set it up with a 2-year cliff, and then they vest at 50%. So that's something really to think about. And even before that, when we were starting out, we learned the hard way about vesting, and so that's something definitely to take into consideration when you're hiring even partners or consultants like us. How are they treating their people? Are they treating them so that they're also aligned with your client's business, and that they feel that they're being taken care of? We also do another thing that's interesting that some companies here might be aware of, and that's open book management. So it's really training everybody on the income statement when they come into the company, so that they understand their role in revenue and their role in controlling expenses, and that there could be a little bit of profit sharing at the end of whatever period once that happens, once profit happens. But it really, there's an education piece of that, and then there's an information piece of that too, where you're being very clear with your employees how each month ends up, what your wins and your losses are, and then how the team work together to both do the performance and then what you hope to work on for the next period of time. So just some things to keep in mind.
Thank you both. Moving on to a question that's highly topical, which is how is AI changing the hiring process? And what should brands realistically be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions that I was looking forward to today. So at ForceBrands, AI is definitely internally reshaping how we match people to companies. We are using it deeply and have been for the better half of the past year. So our proprietary technology automates screening and candidate matching at scale. And it really has allowed us to cut our hiring time by over 40%. So that is pretty significant in under a year. And I will say the change management was probably the biggest piece that we struggled with, just breaking from the normal process that many of the recruiters have worked in for 15 years. So that's something that definitely came up and was definitely something that we went through as an organization. We're also using AI with our C-suite clients, where if we're looking to kind of map talent ecosystems or analyze the leadership qualitative patterns to really inform org design and next hires. The cost savings and speed are real there. But one thing that we want to emphasize is that the human element is still irreplaceable when we're doing all of these things, right? The brands that are getting it right are using AI to augment judgment, not replace it. Really allowing leaders to spend more time on what only humans can do, kind of evaluating character, alignment, and culture fit, and then letting AI, handle those other tactical pieces, like if they went to college or what was their GPA, things like that.
I would say at hiring, we let AI do the very, very beginnings of the criteria applicability, where we've set up some things that we expect to happen when we're going to look at a candidate. And so if those things aren't paid attention to, or people haven't followed instructions, we have AI set up to immediately eliminate those people, because we really do need people who can follow instructions and who can think critically, and who so that's where we have AI, and then it's really detailed meetings with up to 3 or 4 people on the team to ensure culture fit. And we're also very clear about our values up front, because we've had experiences where we've had people who haven't been quite aligned, or just haven't been quite as educated, but also haven't been open to being educated. And we just can't afford that on our team, especially with the brands that we work with. We really do try and work with better for you brands, of course, but B Corps, 1% for the Planet, Naturally Network, those types of brands.
So going back to the idea of using systems and techniques to just make things faster and easier and more efficient. One of the things that we come across, I think, is this common idea that AI is this monolith, right? And so I really want to draw a distinction between using AI to automate certain tasks and procedures, and then using AI to decide who gets through the door. Because if we're looking at equity, if we're looking at figuring out how you can get different kinds of talent through the door in order to even evaluate them at all. Sometimes there can be biases written into whatever your automated process is. And those biases could be, a required cover letter, or they could be various things you need to fill into a form that have specific keywords that are specifically industry specific. And so AI is a tool. All automation, it's a tool. I would strongly suggest that folks kind of come with a shared objective there of, one, seeing who's already in your company, seeing what your current whatever demographics are, your current genders. Sorry, my dog's being crazy. Your current where are you heavy and already represented culturally with your team and your staff? And that is not to say that you may not be in a business where actually having that demographic or several demographics represented is key to your business. It's just, as long as you're aware of it and upfront about it and open to the idea that typically diverse teams make better, stronger decisions and provide more sustainability. Bias is not bad, but you want to make sure that you're not inadvertently cutting out people based on how you're applying your automation tools. Because again, you're trying to make it so you don't have to look at every single resume. You're trying to make sure that people who obviously can't follow directions sort of make it through. And there's a flip side to that, which is some people, I know a lot of people in tech who actually do struggle a little bit with following directions, who are very, very good at what they do. And so some of the opportunities that present themselves when you're using more automated systems, one, make sure that you are doing your best to try and mitigate bias with what those systems are screening out. Two, remembering that AI does tend to hallucinate. And so sometimes it may tell you this is a perfect fit because based on certain keywords, but there's also someone who needs to initially, when you're setting up the platform, really double check that that's really what you're looking for, that thing actually means what you think it means. AI right now is not fantastic at self-checking itself. So always back to there's got to be a human involved. Make sure that you're setting up a process that has been checked by sort of a human being. And then I think lastly, there's sort of some questions that you can ask for that get to how a person is actually, that is, one, legal, and two, sort of above and beyond what someone can just churn out by using ChatGPT, or even what AI can actually grade. And so some of those questions are just an example of like 3 to 4 questions. You can ask what's the first thing that someone does when they see something that can be improved. That can be like, fill this in, 250 characters or less. You can ask what matters to you when you think about what a good job looks like. You can say, what would you have improved about a previous position, supervisor, relationship, company environment. And you can say, what was one thing you loved about a previous position? So one, these are all things that a person has to think about and supply from their own experience. They're also a really good way to double check between what they're putting on the resume, what they're putting, the language they're using and the terms they're using versus how they answer off the cuff. There's a good sort of cognitive check there. And they also remind the person that who may be caught in kind of, I've been doing this for 3 months. I've sent out my resume every place. I'm sending out my cover letter. No one's calling me back. It reminds them that you actually are a human-centered company, that you do care, and that you're using tools, you're using systems, you're using different automation to make it easier for you to, as a company, to find a fit. But that doesn't mean that you don't care about the person behind the resume, behind the cover letter.
It's always nice to hear that AI is not going to take over. There's a human, there will always be a human element to hiring, and there needs to be. But AI obviously can accelerate the process and make it more efficient, which is great. Thank you, everybody, for your perspectives there. So those are the end of our questions. We can get into a couple of the Q&A questions from the chat. So the first one was for you, Ryan, which is around whether interns working on more basic functions like social media creation and management need to sign an NDA and an IP agreement.
I would recommend that, yes.
Yeah.
There, if especially social media creation, anything, any situation where they are creating something new, that is what we want to make sure that it's very clear that the company owns this. You should keep in mind, it doesn't see the question didn't specify if we're talking about paid or unpaid interns. Paid is very simple. You should approach it just like an employee. Sign honestly the same document as employee would sign. For an unpaid intern, first of all, make sure that you are complying with. There's a lot of rules around that. You can't just like pay someone and otherwise and plug them in as a normal job. But if you're going to have them sign something that says what they're doing as an unpaid intern is owned by the company, then there just needs to be a little bit more. You still have to tie it to what they are receiving in consideration for that. And so an unpaid internship is you really can only do it if they're receiving educational value or something along those lines. And so you would just need to make sure that the agreement says, in exchange for the educational value that you're receiving as part of this unpaid internship, that's what you're receiving in exchange for the company owning this. But yeah, overall, different approaches, whatever, but the end result is, I think you should definitely have interns sign these type of agreements still.
It sounds like a theme is just always do the agreements. If you're in doubt, why not have it set up from the get-go? And yes, if anyone else has questions, please put them in the chat and we can address them. Another question that came through was asking for the panel's thoughts on at what point each of you recommends transitioning from properly contracted fractional resources to full-time in-house, especially given that fractional may be at a higher price point than in-house. So any thoughts on when you might make this transition from somebody fractional to somebody full-time?
I think I'll jump in. I think it's when you realize that person is internal to your business. It's not our main goal, but we do place our people, especially our full-time people, with clients. So we've just placed somebody with a oats manufacturer. But she set up their entire inventory system and was key to thinking through their inventory strategy. And they realized that they didn't want to live without her. And so we made that transition that was win-win-win. So I think it's when you realize that personality fit is great, communication style is great, values alignment is great, and skill set is great.
So this question often gets asked to my team at ForceBrands, and I always advise by saying it's less about hitting a certain revenue number, and it's more about recognizing a pattern of need. So fractional talent's awesome. And early on, when we need senior experts to kind of come in and set things up, finance systems, building demand planning, shaping brand strategy. But once that work becomes reoccurring and business critical, as Michelle just mentioned, that's really your signal to bring it in-house, right? If I had to put a revenue kind of turning point on that, it's usually between 15 to 40 million, depending on complexity. But at any revenue point, we always recommend that you have a good mix of both fractional and full-time. Fractional gives you the speed and flexibility, full-time gives you that stability, culture, and continuity, but both are a critical part to the growth journey.
Great. I'm not sure if we have any more questions in the chat. But I think maybe we just wrap here since we've just got a few minutes left. I don't know, just make sure there's no other questions. Yeah, I think that was everything. But thank you so much to our attendees and also to our panelists. I think, if there's one thing that stood out, it's that hiring isn't just about filling roles, it's about building systems and culture that really let your brand scale sustainably. So thank you for all offering your perspective in a really interesting landscape right now on how you're building teams for success. I hope it was useful to the attendees here, and thank you to everybody for being a part of this conversation. So yeah, have a good rest of your days, and hire successfully. I hope you build great teams. Thanks, everybody.